Hi, I'm Dr. Jaime Module. Welcome to Module 13, Self-Correction, in Part 3 of If You Want to Fly Higher, You Must Be Lighter. First of all, I want to say that by self-correction, I mean self with a big S, not a little s. There's an expression, don't take yourself too seriously with a small s, but take yourself with a big S very seriously. I like metaphors and images that kind of represent something about a person or a group, analogies and so on. So I'll just say now, metaphors be with you, because we're going to talk about archetypes. It's a way of thinking of us in a bigger way, in a symbolic way. And that is really important, because this self, this bigger self of us, is not located just in maybe some of the things, the day-to-day things that we may get caught up with. If we have a sense of our best self, what helps us to be happy, what we're meant to do, we're in this module kind of taking up the question, what's my purpose? Then this paying attention to self with a big S is really important, because that purpose doesn't come up, just in our heads. It's really from inside, from our heart. Well, some people might say our soul is inside us. Other people may say, well, we are inside our soul somehow. So to be guided more by this bigger, deeper calling. I have a few archetypes that I'm pretty clear about. This is the ways that I contribute to the world, to the universe. And other people have formally talked about this. And so in this module, we'll be talking a little bit about archetypes. And one way to look at our archetypes is to kind of look from the present back and to see where we are, and then look at all the things that have happened in the past that maybe at the time didn't really make that much sense. They weren't that clear. But then we can now connect the dots, because one thing led to another thing, whether it seemed to be a good thing at the time or not. And eventually we can connect all these things to see what we learned out of it, what we became out of it. When I was years ago at UCLA getting my master's degree, I worked with a professor there who was real interesting and was studying time perceptions. And one of the studies he had was comparing graduate students' perception of time and how they interacted with time with other students, young kids, some kids who were seen as at-risk kids. And what he found, if you think of like the Olympic rings, how they're all connected, was that when people have a sense of interconnection, of the past is connected with the present, which is connected with the future, and they're somewhat balanced. It's not like the past is a giant circle that's connected with a little tiny circle that's connected maybe with a big circle, or they're not disconnected. That when there is that kind of balance and that connection, that people tended to be very successful and become graduate students and things like that. And so rather than think of poverty or think of, all kinds of ways that we might think that somebody's going to be really successful, this is another way to think of what helps people to get through this world and actually to be very productive and have integrity. Is that when we have the connection between our past and our present and our future. When I look back at my life, I see growing up poor, hungry, in a violent alcoholic home, in a pretty rough neighborhood in Northeast LA, with a lot of confusion maybe about my ethnic identity. I'm a second generation Mexican American, or as I would call now Chicano, which means something different than just being Mexican American or Hispanic. That's not in any of the modules, so I'll just have to maybe read more about me in a different place. But growing up in that, and then being, as I mentioned before, being abandoned, abused, and ashamed, and that propelled me to be a really good student. That propelled me to be a very competitive soccer player. That compelled me to really want to help other people. So my childhood experiences impacted me so that as an adult, I became a teacher. Well, no surprise. School was my refuge, and it was important for me. It helped me a lot. I was successful. I felt good there. I became a teacher. I wanted to help other kids to break the cycle of their own limitations and poverty and so on. I loved soccer growing up. It was the one way I connected with my dad, and I became a soccer player. And in college, I played a little bit, mostly sat on the bench. But I coached a little bit. I continued to love soccer, and then when I had kids, had them play, and appreciate that. Church was real important to me growing up. Even though that was the place where I was abused, our family was very, very involved in that faith tradition, in that community. It was our social network. It was our whole identity. And so as an adult, I'm a spiritual person. I was studying to be a priest at one point. I was hungry growing up. That was a real negative experience. And so when I became a teacher, I really worked hard to help teachers to deal with poverty and to be advocates for kids. So what I'm saying is I can connect the dots between the things that impacted me growing up to the person I became as an adult, as a professional. When all the abuse experience came up in 2002, I was doing some really good work as a professor, teaching teachers. And then I became more of an advocate and more of a public person in dealing with abuse issues. And that opened up a whole different way of seeing myself. I needed to reconcile all that past experience and integrate it and to do something constructive with it, which led to me leaving the university and taking up this third question: what's my purpose? Well, being a teacher has always been one of my archetypes, one of my purposes. But I also took up this new role of being a healer. I thought about it actually in undergrad of being a doctor and then helping people in that way. But this is different. As we talked about in an earlier module, about being a wounded healer, taking our life experiences, however harsh, however painful they may have been at that time or for a long time, and finding a way to work with them, to recognize them, to reconcile them, to even appreciate them. As crazy as that sounds, and I've mentioned that I have lots of friendships and lots of people that I know who have been through incredible, extraordinary, devastating experiences and abuse. And at this point, they look back at their lives as wounded healers, and they say, I appreciate it all. I wouldn't change any of it because of what I am doing now with it, because I have this purpose to help other people. So as I look back at my life, I see the past influenced the professional, and that led then to me working more actively and in a focused, intentional way about being a healer, someone who wants to promote healing and help end abuse everywhere. And so I hope that as you continue to develop, that you'll also clarify, what is it that is your purpose, and is there an archetype in particular that will help you to do that? So in my present purpose, I've become a commissioned minister for healing and healthy environments. It's something that I created. I kind of made it up, and that means that I want to integrate this spiritual life with this topic of helping to prevent abuse and to promote healing. So think of your background, look back, and not this moment, but the suggestion at some point, look back and see what led to the next thing, and how those past influences influence maybe some choices you made as an adult, as a professional, as something that you invested a lot of time into. And perhaps there's a real congruence, that you've always been doing what you love and what you're passionate about. But perhaps as you think more deeply about what you really want, what is your big self calling you to be, that may expand or that may shift a little bit, so you can build on all that past experience and go maybe in a more farther down the road in that same area, but maybe in a new direction, in a way that's freed up, in a way that's more integrated with all your life experiences. Some people would call that destino, or destiny, right? We certainly had the idea historically in this country about manifest destiny. We were ordained to conquer the whole continent, drive people off their land, ocean to ocean, have freedom to do whatever we wanted. Well, that's one version of destiny. Other people have the idea of destiny that things that happen to people are just supposed to happen to people, even if it's terrible, and there's nothing we can do about it. But there's another version, and I think it has more to do with what Michelangelo did in his sculpture. If you've ever seen his work, it's incredible that he has these lifelike, powerful figures that come out of granite. And he said that he looked into the granite and all he did was chip away the things that didn't look like what he saw in it, what the granite wanted to become. And that's this idea of destino, I think, in its best sense, that I connect with. And destino in Spanish means destiny. And it has a sense of doing what we are meant to do, not just suffering because that was somehow part of our fate. The founder of Skype said our goal is to be disruptive, but in the cause of making the world a better place. Steve Jobs, who passed away recently, talked about wanting to make a dent in the universe. Right? And so something in us that really wants to be expressed. This is the self with a big S. So this brings up archetypes. Carolyn Miss is a spiritual teacher, has talked a lot about this, and she identifies four, the book is called Sacred Contracts. She has these four kind of archetypes that everybody has. And I'll talk about a couple of them. And then there are lots of other archetypes that we all have some of, and so I'll talk about a couple of those as well. So the four that she identifies are child, victim, saboteur, and prostitute. And I'll talk a little bit about victim and saboteur as they relate to different stages. In this program we talk about the four stages: victim, survivor, thriver, and then thriver. So there's a bit of an overlap in the language, and I'll try to clarify it. But that's to say that each of us has these basic ways that we show up and work in the world. Victim, literally, in a victim place, is that. We experience bad things, fairly powerless. Victim in a survivor place, I would say a victim in a victim place is going to experience just being blindsided and being, in my experience, being abandoned, abused, and ashamed, and so on. Victim in a survivor place might experience the rage of recognizing the bad things that have happened and really being miserable, taking in a survivor as a primary identifier. And so I've mentioned before, this is part of a continuum. My experiences when I was in that survivor mode, that reactive fighting mode as an advocate, I was alienating myself from a lot of other people because of this combative way I was working. When I've taken up a victim archetype as a survivor thriver, I take this abuse experience and I choose when and how to share that. And I learn a lot about how this happened. And in this next stage, taking our victim experience and making it useful for other people, I think is what thrivers do. So the survivor thriver, we make that experience useful for ourselves, and then we can continue to help others. Similarly, a saboteur. Some people do things that are very, very destructive, and as a victim, a saboteur is maybe naive about how they mess things up for themselves or other people. As a survivor, a saboteur might have, maybe in my experience anyway, had more skills, and I chose to be a professional saboteur as a person who was a critical educator, who helped people to question, who helped people to disrupt systems that were oppressive. And as a survivor thriver, I've taken this saboteur energy and left the formal institution to work with individuals and groups who aren't being served. There are other archetypes that are in the workbook for you to look at. The ones that I identify with are teacher and healer and artist. As a writer, I mean. There are many for you. So I invite you to explore those, to chat with others, to explore ways that you can be more of your best self and more of a wounded healer and more of a person who has this integrity and appreciation for all of your life experience from the past to the present and where you're going.